Good evening, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to Cambodia Global Dialogue of Southeast Asia TV. Tonight I have the pleasure to have a good friend from the Asian Development Bank, Sunniya. Welcome to the dialogue.
Thank you very much.
Happy to have you for the first time.
Thank you.
Yes. So for the next 45 minutes, let's have a good chat on what ADB is doing in Cambodia. But before that, why don't I give you a floor since your first time?
Yes.
Say something to the audience so that they know where you're coming from. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Sapana. I'm very happy to be here in Cambodia. I was born in Pakistan, brought up, moved to Canada in my 20s, worked for KPMG Consulting, and then I joined the Asian Development Bank in 2003. And in the interim, I also had a chance to work with the World Bank, and I'm very happy to be here in Cambodia and really appreciate the warm welcome of the people and the government.
When did you come to Cambodia?
Well, I think I initially came on a holiday with my children and my husband in 2014, and we had a great time in Siem Reap. We did a bike tour, and little did I know that I would be coming here to work.
All right.
So I did arrive last year in October.
Great. Well settled now.
Yes.
All
yes.
right. Well, Sonia, I think historically speaking, ADB was the first development bank that took a big leap of faith during the peace process, around the peace process in the early 90s to re-engage with Cambodia. And that, we have to give credit to ADB for that. So it's almost 30 years since ADB has been back to Cambodia. Of course, gradual, right? But in your, retrospect, well, it's been 1 year here, but you've been following Cambodia. What have you seen the major, contribution of Asian Development Bank to Cambodia?
I think we did, you rightly pointed out, Cambodia has been a long-standing member of the Asian Development Bank since we were established in 1966. But we did re-engage in 1992, so it's been a long time. I think major contribution as a regional development bank is really to help our most needy member countries.
Yes.
Particularly those in situations of conflict or post-conflict. We've come in and we've had a very good run with the country. I think in particular in the infrastructure sector, in transport, in human development, which I'll elaborate a little bit more later. And of course in strengthening institutions within the government, particularly in planning, investment, and in providing basic resources and services to people.
Yeah, well, so it's quite broad range. It's a very much cross-cutting from infrastructure all the way down to. I definitely want to touch base on women empowerment because I think it's very important in the context of the sustainability, the UN agenda for sustainable development, that sort of thing. But that will be the next part. But I want to look first. In terms of ADB, intervention in Cambodia, what would be if we take all these elements,
Sure.
what would be the priority that you consider
Sure.
ADB have excelled or have taken the lead, for example, in the development aspect of it?
Sure. I think the way we think about development, we look at it from a citizen's perspective. So for a poor person to be able to move up in life, what are the things they need? So I think the first chunk of our support would be what I say human development,
Yes.
which is in basic education, in skills, in provision of safe drinking water, so that the person is able to function and work.
Yes.
The second is to get those services, you have to have government institutions. So we've worked, I think that's the second chunk where, which I mentioned earlier. We've worked with government in their planning and budgeting and providing resources and developing systems. That's the second chunk to get those services.
Okay.
And the third is once the person is productive, has basic capabilities, and is producing, how do you get things to market? And that's where our infrastructure investment
Yes,
comes
yes,
in,
yes.
with transport, with energy, and connection to markets.
Yes. Well, I think the first, it's sort of like the Maslow hierarchy of need, right? But for a country, I think the first layer is the human security. If I can sort of like coin it a bit, because you gotta have access to your health have to be taken care, right? You got to be educated. But you in the area of education, which is very dear to me, are you very much involved in that in the education, primary, secondary, what,
Yes.
vocational?
Yeah, so within education, I think the government has assigned different subsectors to different agencies.
Yes.
So for ADB, traditionally we've been doing lower secondary education.
Okay.
We are now increasingly doing STEM education, which
Okay.
is science, technology, engineering, mathematics.
Yes, yes.
We're also doing work in TVET, in skills development.
Yes.
And there we're very excited to be bringing in private participation in designing curriculum and in upgrading standards so that it meets the needs of firms, particularly in the special economic zones.
Well, ADB has been quite involved, if I recall, way when I was in the government, in terms of PPP.
Yes.
I think you're probably one of the pioneer to, help. I would say raise the awareness on the value, on the benefit of having a private sector partnership in that. But then in TVET, this is quite important, as you know, the majority of our garment and footwear, we don't want to be there forever.
Yes.
I mean, you got to move up the value chain, and this is quite important. STEM is great news to me. Tell me more about what's your future in terms of pushing STEM.
Yeah, well, I think first, when we look at, we do different assessments, and learning assessment is very critical. Learning, it's not just sufficient to put kids in school, but what are they learning? And I think in terms of STEM, I think getting kids a solid high school education is very, very important.
Yes.
Where they have the fundamentals of math, of science, really well learned.
Yes.
So that when they go on to become technicians, let's say,
Yes.
perhaps technicians, perhaps
Yes.
engineers,
Yeah.
perhaps scientists, that this fundamental, foundational base is very strong. So we're working with the Ministry of Education in improving the provision of such education and also in assessing what kids are actually learning.
Okay.
So that's, I think, the first one. And of course, you must have heard of New Generation Schools, resource
Yes.
schools,
Yes.
which are, islands of excellence that will hopefully demonstrate better, improved teaching methods and the outcomes, which can then be spread across to other schools. So I think that's one. I think the second one, is to give kids opportunities to actually have practical experience. So I think there we would be looking at ways in which governments can use their funding not only to set up their own TVET institutions, but finance private sector when they invest in training. That can be done through, training vouchers, so to speak.
It's very innovative.
Yes. Or through tax incentives. A lot of countries around the world actually provide tax incentives. The third, I think, is also for students themselves, for workers themselves. Again, as incomes go up and as people start paying taxes, you must invest in your own learning.
Yes.
And this is where, in our country partnership strategy,
Yes,
which
sure.
will be hopefully approved very soon,
Yes.
we talk about lifelong learning.
Okay. That's great. Let's move up a bit to the next node, which is institutional. I think governance matter. I would say at the end of the day, institution matter to be more precise, because if the institution is strong, everything fall in place. But if the institution is weak, it's not much you can do. Your involvement in institution building is pretty much focused on what area?
Well, that's a big question, Siphana. I think institution building is so critical. I'm so
Yes.
glad you mentioned that. But I think even before you come to institutions, I think, when I think about development, I
Yes.
think one of the questions I ask myself, what is the social contract that this country
Yes.
has agreed to or is trying to agree to?
Yes.
What is the basic package of services that the people would like and that government is obliged to provide? So I think that dialogue is extremely critical, and it's a very important element before we even get to institution building to deliver those services. That takes many, many forms. The dialogue, I'm sure Cambodia has its own systems, which we can discuss of undertaking that. So that's the first. The second, I think, as you know, we have three very important institutions in most countries: the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. And I think from an institutional package or from an institutional viewpoint, having separation of clear roles and credibility in these institutions is very important. Third, an area I think where ADB comes in is we work mostly with the executive.
Okay. Okay.
And in that area, I think we work with ministries of finance, of planning, with line ministries. And when we talk about institution building, we talk about three things. One is the people
Okay.
who are being resourced. What are the skills of those people? Second is systems,
Yeah.
more transparent systems, more competitive systems.
Legislation fall into system? Oh.
Yes, legislation, I think, as and when needed by government, we
Okay.
are requested to provide
Okay.
input and technical
Yeah.
expertise. And capabilities, I think, would be the third one.
Yes, yeah.
So those are three areas.
Yeah. Capacity of civil servant, for example. Right?
Yes, civil servant, but also of government, as I mentioned earlier. Because service delivery is no longer just the purview of government. I
Yes.
think smart governments
Yes.
figure out, I have a pool of resources.
Yes.
How do I best deploy it in the most cost-effective manner? If it makes sense to engage a civil society organization, why not? As long as the results are there.
Yes, yes.
So I think that's the kind of shift in thinking of how best to make use of services that we hope under our
I
new
think
strategy.
civil society is it's very important because Cambodia, I would say they're part of our society now. I don't know how many other country of the size of 16 million people have 5,000 NGO, but they're there. I mean, they're part of our society. You go to the province, they're there. Capacity building in their own way, that sort of thing, So I'm glad they have a space under the sun in this context here. Yeah.
But I think it's also, when I look at Cambodia, I think it's also part of the historical context.
Yes.
Because when this country started rebuilding and government institutions started rebuilding, a lot of agencies came out to help. But as the country develops and strengthens, I think there'll be more shifting of more responsibility to formal institutions.
Yeah, I agree with you because and this is probably when I talk to many of civil society organizations, there's a lot of rethinking where the future will be because they have done their job for what they were supposed to be in a post-conflict setting.
Yes.
But as the country mature, as the institutions are built, as capacity are being developed, this become more a substitution. I'm not saying they're not relevant, but they are not as relevant as before.
Yes, and Sapana, I think the way to look at it is also, let me give you a very good example from Cambodia's AC Leader Bank.
Yes.
Now, it started off as a very small microfinance institution under the UN.
Yes.
And it developed.
Yes.
And as it developed over time, with the good capabilities, and it's gone on to become the leading bank in Cambodia. So these institutions also morph and develop, amalgamate, disappear, or
thrive.
or thrive. Yes.
No, I recall when Asilda was started, Jani was there across the building because I was with UNDP at that time, So the building is right across the street in Bangkok, Kong, right? And then you see the rise to the point that now it's probably one of the biggest private sector banking, But these are a good example. But I see other civil society entity morphing into social enterprise, that sort of thing also, right? We're going to take a short break. And when we come back, I want to delve to something which is at third level, which is to the market, industry, infrastructure, but more focused on something that's very, again, dear to me, which is green economy, green growth,
Sure.
How can we skip the learning curve?
Great, thank you.
All right. Sunniya, okay, now we move up the pyramid.
Sure.
Getting, product to the market, infrastructure, connectivity. Of course, in this region, whenever you mention about the GMS, is the equivalent of mentioning ADB. Let's be real about that.
Yes.
You mentioned corridor. It's pretty much, coin that ADB is there, right? So in a way, ADB have good branding, so people can connote, that's ADB, that GMS ADB, corridor ADB. So connectivity is there, infrastructure is there, but on this green growth, which is the new industry, right? The world is very worried now with this climate change, that sort of thing. What is your main program that the ADB, particularly as an institution, but also in Cambodia, what's the area of focus?
Thank you very much for mentioning that. I think for ADB, we have set in our new strategy 2030, we have two key targets, and one of those relates to climate change.
Okay.
And a large part of ADB's financing will be going into that area. The second, of course, relates to gender, which we can talk about later. But in terms of Cambodia, I think about 25% of our lending in the future will be in the agriculture, natural resources sector.
25%.
That's over the next 5 years. And within that, I think we have been supporting government with, just mechanisms to monitor the effects of climate change. And with increasing, floods and droughts in Cambodia, particularly droughts, the focus of our lending is going to be on integrated resource management, which means not simply investing in, infrastructure, but looking at watershed management, river basin management.
There's a nexus that you're talking about.
Yes.
Agriculture, water management.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Agriculture, forestry, because you have to look at the whole area.
Yes.
It's not simply on the infrastructure aspect or value chain aspect.
Yes.
Because you have one flooding or a drought, and of course, that can cause massive damage, as has happened in Cambodia with flooding. And not only, I think, the interesting thing about climate change is there are no boundaries. We had the recent flood, a dam breakout in Lao, not related to climate change, of course, but, it had impact here. And similarly, if rivers dry up upstream, that's going to have an impact on what water Cambodian farmers are going to receive.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned that because river dry out. Sometimes it's a natural process, because whenever you come back and about to land, you can see on the left side, you see the Mekong at one point, it make a L-shaped turn.
Yes.
So you look there and say, oh my God, what is that wide, big thing in the middle of the river? It's sandbank. It's right in the middle. Well, if you leave it until it become an island, right, in 10 years. But then you see some small dot. It's all the sandbars, because they're dredging. Because if not, the Mekong will be just blocked right there. So, and this purely natural. But can you imagine the effect, on the ecosystem, for example,
And therefore, I think in order to prepare for that, for the eventuality that climate change is happening, and to make communities more resilient and systems more resilient, we are focusing, like I mentioned, on integrated resource management, river basin, watershed protection, but also in helping farmers move to more higher value added produce, while conserving energy, water usage, and irrigation practices. So that's some of the ways in which we're helping.
Let's face it, I was quite involved about 8 years ago on the rice policy, the export rice policy, and we find that we have a good policy, but again the reality is that climate change could really distort this whole production, and people could be totally wiped out. For one drought, they could lose everything, right? So this sort of a crop diversification. Are you working on that also?
Yes, we are. As I mentioned, we are going into more higher value-added produce, for instance, pepper, cashews. But also I should mention, it has to do with the produce, but also with the marketing, the branding, the packaging. Who would have thought that Fiji would be selling water, internationally Fiji water overseas in New York City?
You're right.
But there you go. So I think Cambodia also needs to produce, to get higher value out of a product, there's a number of steps. And branding, packaging, marketing are very, very critical elements. So it's not just the product itself. So I think
but that's where the role of the private sector come to play, no? Yeah. But then here, the role it'd be more, you sort of like more helping match the demand supply, helping fill the technical understanding,
Yes, I think we do reach out. Of course, entrepreneurship, unlike skills, is not something that can be taught, but it can flourish in the right environment. So I think our role is on the technical side. We do help with engineering solutions. We're thinking about land use planning. We also help to connect to the private sector. But it is, of course, the role of the private sector then to come in and dialogue with us, and of course with the government on what they would need.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, we don't substitute for private sector partners, but we try to see how we can bring in regional interest and diversification of investor interest into Cambodia.
In green growth, are you looking also at alternative energy? Because it's
Yes.
interesting because again, when you fly over Cambodia, when you look at the window, I see a lot this, I would say, macro bird's eye view on what's happening in the country. And my latest discovery was a solar farm
Yes.
from the sky. Oh my God, how big it is!
Yes.
Are you involved in solar energy?
Yes, definitely. We did the first in 2016, the first competitively bid solar farm in Cambodia. This was a 10 megawatt solar plant in Bavet.
Okay.
And,
How's it doing?
Oh, it's doing really well.
Oh, I'm excited about it.
Yes, yes.
I'm excited.
And just recently, we've just helped EDC with a competitive bidding for a 60 megawatt solar power plant, and it had attracted a lot of investor interest. We did a roadshow in Singapore, exceptional interest. And as our vice president was saying, a lot of bidders will be disappointed to have not won. So there is a lot of potential to really expand solar power and bring those investors in. I should mention, we are helping the government with the development of a power development plan.
Yes,
We hope to have that approved hopefully by November, presented to policymakers. And then hopefully next year we'll do an investor forum.
So you hit a few birds with one stone here. You got a good PPP,
Yes.
you got solar energy in place, and you got the government to start looking at public tender.
Yes.
This is, to me, when I saw on Khmer Time and Phnom Penh Post the ad, I said, wow.
Yes.
Because 3 years ago, you will not see this from EDC.
Yeah.
They are not ready in terms of policy, in terms of regulation, but I think now they prime to move forward.
Yes.
It's like opening the floodgate now.
And I think my kudos to EDC and the government,
Yes.
because I think they've seen the results of
Yes.
what competition can do,
Yes.
transparent bidding process can do, because that really helps bring down
Yes.
the baselines
Yeah.
in terms of pricing. So there are real benefits to this method, and we're very proud to have been part of that.
I was helping the Ministry of Public Works and Transport on the master plan on the transport and logistics. So you see the focus on linking to the region, the development pole, that sort of thing. Not every pole have access to good electricity, and this solar energy is the answer, because you could have a solar farm in remote area because the sun is everywhere in Cambodia. So this could unravel the development paradigm.
And the technology is evolving. Of course, with solar, it is not base load as yet.
Yes.
But there is important investments being made in battery storage.
Yes.
But on the other hand, I think gas is also very promising in terms of changing the energy mix. And one of the things, of course, we want to do is help Cambodia go on a low carbon path of development.
Yes.
Through these kinds of interventions. So from a green growth perspective, from a green strategy perspective, which is of course government policy and well documented, these are some of the ways in which we're helping.
I think you need to go next step is helping develop more standard for green building.
Yes.
Green building, that's the next one. Right?
It is, and we've actually done work. Our private sector department
is that right?
has, well, not in Cambodia
Yeah, yeah.
as yet, but definitely energy efficiency, and I certainly have taken steps towards that in my own office.
Yes.
So we're very conscious, our staff, to switch off lights. We have
Yes.
signs everywhere.
Yes.
I think another passion of mine is to try and get recycling done.
Yes.
So hopefully we will talk to the Phnom Penh government, and this can be in concert with civil society organizations. Doesn't
Yes,
require
yeah.
a lot of money.
Yes.
But having recycling in condominium buildings
Yes.
is how a lot of cities started with this movement.
When you go to Siem Reap next time, you should stop by at that hotel called Memoir. That's so the owner introduced this sort of like climate change related. So no more plastic bottle.
Great.
It's all this
Yes.
This is the bottle, right? but no plastic, right? And I didn't realize how much plastic we are consuming. So he told me, he said, brother, it's very simple. Every night you have to put at least 2 bottles. So if you have 100 room, that's 200 bottles per day, right?
Yes.
So you multiply per year, you multiply with 200 hotel in Siem Reap, you multiply by how many plastic bottle, you can see the potential damage
Yes.
plastic can do to our community.
Absolutely, and I think I was actually over the weekend I had gone to the beach with my daughter, and
Yes.
that was a very eco-friendly resort.
Yes.
And of course we had glass bottles
Yes.
in the waste bins. There was a cloth instead of a plastic bag.
Yeah.
Instead of shampoo bottles, we had lovely ceramic bottles with shampoo.
Yes.
So it can be done.
Yes.
But I also got thinking that you mentioned energy efficiency. I think I remember from my childhood in the 70s.
Yes.
The way we build buildings was very different.
Yeah.
We had very high ceilings.
Yes.
We had ventilators.
Mhm.
We had thick walls.
Yes.
And I think, that's something I think countries like Cambodia should also think about. And in terms, I think, of people...
Learn from the past.
Learn from the past.
Learn from the
because
past.
It was all there. We had paper bags.
Yes.
We had banana leaf for packaging.
Yeah.
So I think it is sort of going back to the future, I think, in a way.
Wow, that's quite an exciting. But I think there's something also that would link to the next topic I want to talk about is women empowerment, micro enterprise, rural development per se. But what we just discussed right now, can you imagine if we could, really build the awareness, how much potential micro enterprise job,
Yes.
we could create at the provincial level, at the rural area level.
No, absolutely. And I think what struck me when I first came to Cambodia was just how much potential it has in the wellness industry.
Yes.
So I think of countries like Costa Rica, I think of countries like Bhutan, and I said a country of 16 million people, beautiful natural resources.
Yeah.
If these could be preserved and growing demand globally in the wellness industry, whether
Yes.
it's ecotourism, it's healthier products, it's organic food supplies.
Yes.
There is a huge potential. I think, and I do hope that the government and the private sector will look into this, because I think regionally, I really see this as a very high potential area,
Yeah.
a niche area, but something I think Cambodia can certainly capitalize on and build a branding.
Yeah. Well, I would say in the this wellness area, it's a new thing, as people live longer, they want a better quality. And let's face it, the middle class, Cambodian middle class is rising.
Yes.
So we start to want more quality. The level of education matter. People understand more the impact of the environment in their life, that sort of thing. So it's how do we change a paradigm of a post-war conflict society mindset where survival is day to day,
Yes, yes.
right? Let's not think of future, let's survive today, right? It's very different than now we're secure enough, let's look at 20 years down the road when our kids grow, what can we do, that sort of thing. This is a paradigm shift.
It is, and I think, again, like I mentioned, I think what's wonderful now, I think with connectivity, particularly information connectivity, is young people connect with like-minded people all over the world.
Yes.
There are so many movements. I look at my own children, I look at my nieces and nephews, and they're even playing games
Yeah, across continent.
across the globe. So I think in terms of that shift, it's no longer just the policymakers,
Yes.
but I think openness to information, allowing young people to think critically, encouraging them to come up with local initiatives,
Yes.
having competitions where certain aspects are highlighted, just raising
Yes.
that awareness. And I think, having public campaigns, I think from on recycling, etc.,
Yes.
would be very, very beneficial to raising that awareness in a sort of a fun way.
Yeah. Well, we're coming to the last break, but when we come back, I want to spend the last part more on women empowerment, because I believe in Cambodia, the population, let's face it, if you look at the population pyramid, we have more women than male. If you look at the industry, there's more female worker than male, but is the gender balance in the government, in the parliament, in the court system? I want to hear more from you, because I think I know you mentioned that in your Agenda 2030
Yes.
is one of the pillar, next to climate change.
Yes, it is.
All right. So another break.
Thank you.
So Nia, last stretch, something quite exciting, and it's not something that people don't know, because in Cambodia we have the Men's Woman Affair.
Yes.
Dr. Pavi, a good friend. So woman empowerment is there, but is that enough? So perhaps you being the first, right? You're the first, director, country director, ADB in Cambodia,
Yes,
as a
first
female.
That's
All
correct.
right, please.
Well, thank you. I think you asked me a question which is very, very close to my heart, because I think it touches all aspects. It touches aspects of our personal life, of society's expectations, and of course what women want in their lives. And I know when I first arrived in Cambodia, one of the things which was very familiar and nice was, I think, generally, the social attitude towards women. I mean, women are given a lot of respect,
Yes.
and it's a matriarchal society. When men get married,
Yes.
they move into their wife's home.
I spent 5 years with my in-law.
There you go. But on the other hand, I think when we look at women in positions of power and
Yes.
decision making, the statistics are very telling. And again, it's not unusual, and you kind of wonder, why is that? Why is that? The
Why
case?
is that? Why is that?
I think if you look at the analysis, and I'll draw comparisons with my own home country,
okay.
my country of my birth, Pakistan.
Yes.
I grew up in a very traditional family. I'm a Pathan, and we have segregation in our homes between men and women. I mean, to that extent, during the days of my grandmother.
Yeah.
But there was always a very strong emphasis on education and on participation and leadership.
Okay.
So that was there, despite it being a very, very traditional
Bit so like
society.
paradox, huh?
Yes. But I think when a girl reached a certain age, the traditional expectations were there, in the sense that she would get married by a
Yes.
certain age, and of course would, be supportive to her husband and to her in-laws, which is all very good, and I highly respect that. But I think what it comes down to is, I think, society support for women. Women are human like all other
Yes,
people. We have our intelligence, we have our ambitions
Emotion.
and emotions, and we do want to contribute to society. So I think to have women in positions of power, to have women in workplaces, I think society needs to be a little bit more supportive, in the sense that when we educate women, we provide the support, particularly when they have young children. So, for instance, my mother provided a great deal of support when my kids were young to help me, and I intend to do the same for
Yes,
my
yes.
daughters. So did my mother-in-law. That helped a lot. My husband was very supportive. So family support, I think, for a working woman is extremely critical.
Yes.
It doesn't make the job easier, because as a mother, you still want to, of course, take care of your children. But even if you're not a mother, I think social support and accepting that women, capable women, or women who want to develop their capabilities, it shouldn't be something that they should feel guilty about. That's
Yes.
one. The second, I think, which is very fundamental from an institutional perspective, is that we have to make workplaces more family friendly. This goes for men.
Give me some example.
This goes for men and for women.
Yeah.
So if you have a young man in the office who is a father or who has an aging parent,
Okay.
I think our workplaces should allow for the man also to go home and be supported by other workers when he needs time off or she
Okay.
needs time off. I think that really will help. I think bringing more women, and not only into the workforce, but also to help them stay in the workforce. I think that is gradually changing. But I think, again, when you talk about the quality of life, the pace at which we work and the expectations we set for people and for ourselves as society, at the end, Sapana, at the end of the day, when I look back, what is it that we're all working for?
Yeah.
Is to have a good life.
Yes.
And if our work is constantly in conflict with our home obligations,
Yes,
that
yes.
is not conducive. So I think we just need to step back as employees, as society, and support women. Of course, if you're a surgeon, and my mother was a surgeon, there were times when she had a very heavy workload,
Yeah.
but we as children understood
Yeah.
that is her profession and she needs to be at a certain place.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
does not in any way, bar her from her roles as a homemaker. So I think in society, particularly Asian societies, I think sometimes there's such a huge conflict, which should not be the case. So I think my message, I think, would be in terms of gender equality. As in Cambodia, Cambodia owes much of its growth, as you mentioned, from garments to tourism to women's contribution. Going forward, we need to ensure that young girls and young boys are trained in good skills, and that when they're ready to enter the workforce, they are fully supported and supported by society to play that role.
Well, you probably met my wife, something along that line, after we get married, she didn't speak English, so not, well, she have her education, but not advanced. So I was encouraging her. I say, go back to school, learn the language. Now she's running a law firm, right? And I'm proud of it. But again, sometimes you sort of take for granted until she say, look, I gotta go to Singapore for an arbitration. You take care of the kids. You take care of the house. And here's the key. And now suddenly for 3 days I go crazy because there's a million things I have to do, right? Take care of the food, who's gonna drive, God knows whatever, right? So that's what make you appreciate, my God, it's not just work. There are the other side, which is then the kids come, I have problem at school, whatever, right? And these are the things that normally men, we sort of shield. Because, we rarely been told about that. Right?
Or experienced it.
Or experienced it, that sort of thing. So I can, my personal life, I can empathize with that. And that's why I think it's important.
It's easier. I think in some ways it's a lot easier if, traditionally, it's much easier for couples if the man or one person is leading and the other's looking after home. Of course it's easier. But the question is it fair?
Exactly.
Is it fair?
In fact, that was the point that she raised, because when I moved to Geneva, she have to give up her career. So for 3.5 years, she's taking care of the kid, drive to school, cook, whatever, while I thrive in my career. But is that fair? So when I come back, she have to catch up thing. So to me, it's a lot of this subtle balance, We cannot just say, well, it's your obligation, right? But she, has as much ambition, she want to thrive like any other person, career-wise, right?
And I think, again, from a public policy perspective, you come from that. I think, again, public policy plays a very, very critical role. So having the laws, number one, that grant all citizens, certain access and certain rights to education, to protection, particularly from gender-based violence, which is very, very prevalent even now across the world, and to services which will allow single mothers or single fathers to cope, through
what do you think drive gender violence worldwide? What do you think are the triggering?
Oh gosh, I mentioned gender violence, but violence in itself,
it
is an imbalance of power and lack of I think systems which people can access, and perhaps I think at a very, very basic level, lack of awareness of setting boundaries, even in the most personal and I think intimate relationships, and of course societal sometimes cover up and lack of institutions where one can go for help. And I think
particularly for Asian, the cultural is not helping in that sense, no?
It isn't, but I think awareness is growing. I think definitely with information it is growing, but it has a lot to do not just with society. I think it has a lot to do with the psychological and mental health of people. And I think that aspect sometimes doesn't get as much attention as it should. So a core part of curriculum, I think, as children are growing up, should be on emotional health. We talk a lot about STEM education. We talk a lot about sciences, creativity.
We have to focus more on EQ now, not just IQ.
Absolutely.
EQ.
And I think it has very real implications. So the ability to control your emotions, manage your anger, work productively.
The soft skill.
The soft skills have to be taught early and have to be maintained. And it's not just at the workplace, but also at home. And just having respectful conversations. But it is, as I mentioned, it is one of those aspects. The reason I think it perpetuates is very, very complex. But the more awareness one can build around it, and the more support from policy and legislative perspective you can provide, is extremely critical. So I think coming back to your point earlier about women's representation in positions of power is very, very critical, because I think that gives a signal about the government's view about where it holds women. In terms of decision making, and serious decision making. That's one. And the second, I think it inspires a lot of young children to see that this is perfectly normal.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Well, I want to touch a bit on the women empowerment, but more on the private sector side, more on the entrepreneur side. You met Dr. Pavi several times, I'm pretty sure. She's been very, very, I would say, influential in driving the women entrepreneurship. We have the Cambodian Women Entrepreneur Association, which I happen to be co-found with her years ago, right? And now I bump to the chair there, and she say, well, brother, you don't spend much time with us anymore. I say, yeah, because you have matured. 10 years ago, yes, but now the organization is strong. You have 300 or 400 membership there already, so it's coming. But to me, I still feel that we still have a long way to go, right? To have more women entrepreneurship, not just in Phnom Penh. Phnom Penh is easy, but how to help them, in the provincial level, because the issue of rural migration matter. If they cannot create something in their hometown, they will come to Phnom Penh, and we don't want that.
Well, I think entrepreneurship, and particularly for women, I think the first thing would be, for me, even before providing resources, is mentorship. Because we need to link women with men and women who can mentor them in product development, or in just basically having the survival skills to sort of stomach the risks that come with entrepreneurship. So I think mentorship is extremely critical, both from a networking perspective, but also from an experiential perspective. So that's first. I think second, of course, basic skills, knowing how to make a business plan, how to present a product, how to negotiate with the bankers. Those skills, I think, would be very important, even if you're opening a small poultry farm, for that matter. So technical skills, business planning skills. And third, of course, things like finance are important,
finance,
which I think is pretty. I mean, it's still low, but I think it's still it is available if you have a good product. And fourth, of course, like I mentioned earlier, it is the product, but also how you present it to the market, and linking up. I think in terms of the value chain. So for women, I think we hope ADB, we hope to work more on entrepreneurship with the Ministry of Women's Affairs and with the Ministry of Economy.
And I think the fact that the economy is so wide open already, access to knowledge, access to technology, exposure. To me, if I can say, is probably the most powerful. Is to be able to fly without a visa to Bangkok to see how they do, to fly to Singapore, Malaysia.
Yes, and Siphana, on that, I think I would mention that one of the it's also, of course, a lot about competitiveness. So efficiency is very, very important, right? How we use electricity, how we use inputs, including labor. What we charge for our services, those I think are very, very critical aspects. So for me, I think building competitiveness within Cambodia, finding ways to build that would be very, very, very important.
I find, because you mentioned the word mentorship, I do a lot of mentoring for the young entrepreneur, and I find that now there are a very strong feeling that we know some, we can help the next one. The guy who knows this much will help this much, and then it go down to the ripple effect, right? We start to see now micro grouping, micro networking of business, of different, but self-supporting. You know, look, I'm an accountant.
Yes.
All right, guys. So I can help you on how accounting. Right. So it's a mutual,
Beneficial.
not collective, but
Yes.
they have this informal supporting structure. You know.
And I think it's also, if I may, I think, and I'm very glad to hear about that, about this microcosms developing. But if you look at the United States, which has some of, I think, one of the most world-renowned
Yes.
culture of entrepreneurship.
Yes.
I mean, people go to that country to make it big.
Yes.
And what drives that? I think it's this mixture of people knowing that it's good. What's just doing good for society. You know?
Yes.
And that helps. I mean,
Yes.
and a lot of that has to do with flow of information.
Yes.
So just to share with you, one of my earliest jobs when I'd gone to Canada in the late 90s was to do research, trying to figure out what's the next big thing in IT. And the only thing I had to do was pick up the phone and call up some very, very important people in North America, in Canada, and in the US.
Yeah.
And they were willing to give me their time
Yeah.
and information.
Yes.
On what they thought was going to be the big idea. And so we put this together. And this was
Yeah.
totally free of cost. We
Yes.
just sent them a copy of the report
Yeah.
at the end. But it was such a valuable knowledge base. Just so I think coming to what EDB is going to be doing
Yes.
in Cambodia, I think one of the areas is that we do want to build this knowledge base and improve information flows, whether it's through ICT, whether it's through panel discussions, through policy dialogue, because a lot of it is very soft. A lot of that environment, creating that environment
Yes.
where you can have that flow of information amongst people and between policymakers and people is going to be very critical.
Well, I find to be able to give, right, it's very warm to the heart, and that's why I do a lot of this volunteer mentorship. When I came back from Geneva, at that time was Deputy Prime Minister Kichon,
Yes.
Minister of Finance, and I went to pay him a courtesy visit, and I asked him, Uncle, what's the advice? I just back, a bit lost after 3.5 years away from home. He say, you should be helping the next generation. It's like wine bottle, 2009, right? At that time it was 2009, right? It's in the bottle but not drinkable yet.
Yes.
So you need to, move the bottle. You need to. So I took this advice to heart, and so I give a lot of lecture, here and there, a couple hours. One day, thing that touched me most is that there was 4 brothers. They invite me for lunch, and they asked me. They say, "Look, big brother, our family have built the business to the point that we feel that we reach a plateau now. We need to get out. We need to enter the world. Now, we have the capability, but we plateau out. Would you accept to be our mentor?"
Yes.
That was 6 years ago. And I was very touched. And you can see that it's 2 lunch a month, right?
Yes.
Over pizza.
Yeah.
But I'm playing the devil advocate. Why you do this? Why you do this? Have you thought about that? There's a lot of why.
Yes.
I think it's me more asking no questions than. But now they're thriving. They are thriving. They could compete with any big company in the world.
I think you're so right. I think this attitude of giving back,
Yes.
if we can inculcate that in
Yes.
most people, because that would be good for the for the collective good,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That's one. And I think the other thing which you have sort of indirectly touched upon is being open-minded.
Yes.
We all don't have all the skills and
Yeah.
capabilities,
Yeah.
right? So I think being open to attracting talent from the
Yes.
world, being open, whether it's in our own personal companies or in public policy or in the work that the Asian Development Bank does, but just being open-minded to ideas and connecting the dots
Yes.
and just building the
Yeah.
knowledge base, and building it as you go along.
Yeah.
I think those kinds of attitudes, is learning by doing,
Yeah.
is I think what will help the country.
Yeah. So now occasionally I run to old friend. He's about to retire, and they will ask me, Siphana, would you spare a few moments
Yes.
with my kids? That sort of thing,
Yes.
Anyway, we're running out of time soon, So I want to see if you can sort of like share a bit. What do you think the key message that you want to pass on to the audience? Anything, but
Sure.
from this session.
Yeah, I think my main message would be take risks, trust your instincts, and don't worry about the future. It will all work out.
That was short, sweet, simple, but very meaningful.
Thank you.
Take risks. Yeah, now entrepreneurship is all about taking risks, right? And a leap of faith also.
It is.
Yeah. But Sonia, I think I really appreciate that we have this short exchange. We cover quite a bit, I would say. We cover from the basic human security aspect, move up to the
Green growth,
the institution,
Yes.
the governance,
Gender.
STEM, green growth, then climate change, wrapping up with woman empowerment, the soft side of it, of life, and wrapping up with a message of mentoring, about giving. I think that's quite a powerful message.
Thank you.
I think there's a lot of people in this country now. There's one thing that I always say when I meet ambassadors or head of agencies, that the one thing that they've done for Cambodia for the last 20 years is helping the new generation acquire the knowledge, so that they are able to sustain by giving back to society. And that's how I see sustainability. It's only so long that the world can help. At some point, we should help ourselves, and at some point, we should be able to go abroad and help. So on that note, so thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And I think we have a very rich discussion. Yeah.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to our next discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you. Yes. All right, it's not so bad.
Not so bad. I think it went well.